our podcast is about your journey in music, how you got to where you are now. And I know you have a book coming out, so we can talk about that. And
Sure.
I also want to talk about how much I love the art you're doing. You must.
Oh man, thank you.
Oh
Thanks a lot.
yeah, yeah. It's so sick. So I want to talk to you about that quite a bit. But born in Missouri, what was that
That's
like?
right. Um, well, small town upbringing, really. I mean, until I was 12 or so, my mother remarried, and that brought us to Central Texas. But up to that point, we lived in a little town called Kennett, Missouri, which is down in the Boot Heel, kind of sits down into Arkansas, a little bit north of Memphis, by the rivers
Mm-hmm.
directive. And it's largely cotton and soybean farming, and maybe 10,000 people, and
Wow.
flatness as far as you can see, and a lot of that, a lot of that time there, and a lot of those years, and just a lot of that. I guess I was feeling slightly nostalgic for that part of the world because I went back there um, as kind of the foundation of this book. And so I guess in a way I did go home again because it definitely inspired this particular story that I'm about to release.
That's amazing. And so you moved to Texas at 11.
Yeah,
Were you interested in music prior to
yeah,
that? Like, how'd you get into music?
definitely. There wasn't a lot else to do in Kennett other than, maybe play sports or get into some trouble. And I did both of those for sure. But it got to a point where I don't know. I had been kicking around with the drums, from age, around age 8 or 9, and then my mom bought me my first proper drum kit at age 10, and I was just obsessed with learning records from beginning to end, and it didn't matter if it was, Rush or I don't
That's a
know the
that's quite the
Go-Go's.
bar to go with
Yeah,
at 11.
I just wanted to learn. I wanted to learn as much as I could about playing drums, and so I was self-taught pretty much. I would just put headphones on and play along to records from beginning to end. And I had a bit of a piano background as well, leading up to that, and so that gave me a little sense of melody going in. So I feel like early on I started um, seeing even things from a drumming perspective in more of a songwriter's perspective or in more of a melodic perspective based on that piano background. And so I just carried that on with me through junior high and high school, and, formed some knockaround bands that played at the county fairs in high school, and then went to college and joined about 6 bands, I think, right upon arrival. So
Wow.
that's the way Denton, Texas was back then. It was just tons of bands and some good venues, and just a lot of people wanted to play. It's a big music school, so a lot of people just wanted to explore and figure out music together.
That's awesome. That's really cool to have that like a whole school experience as far as other people that wanted to play, peers that wanted to join you. And as a
Yeah,
drummer, I'm sure you had the pick of the litter. You know what I
I had
mean?
options for sure. Definitely had options. I was lucky for that, but more importantly, I wound up making some of my lifelong friends and my bandmates from Centromatic and South San Gabriel. That's around the time that we all met. Was the late '80s, early '90s in Denton. And the music scene there, it's still very fertile. I mean, there's still tons of bands there and great venues, and it's flourishing. But I come from a slightly older generation, and we all still look in on each other and support each other. It's just that kind of school, affordable liberal arts school close to Dallas. So culturally and economically, its resources, I think, were pretty sturdy for a good scene, for a really
Mhm.
good music scene.
Well, you went to an art? Was it an art high school or is it art college?
Well, I mean, University of North Texas.
Oh, okay.
So, large liberal arts university,
Sure.
and relatively affordable. And like I say, close to Dallas, so you get a lot of folks coming up from there. But it just was that good combination where it's close enough to the big city to where those resources and those venues and even those music publications and community radio and indie rock radio kind of stuff, those elements are definitely present, and they kind of help Denton out. But Denton was also and is also kind of sovereign on, as its own scene.
Mhm. Mhm. And
So,
well, when prior to going to North Texas, like those bands you had in high school and middle school, how serious were you guys playing it? Did you, at that point, were you like, I want to be a musician? Like, this is going to be my career?
Um, the former for sure. I wasn't totally sure that it was going to be my career, but I wanted it to be. I had hopes. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely had hopes for it to be, but I also understood uh, the financial realities of that, and that a lot of that was based on luck and timing and things like that. So with that, I didn't go to school for music. I went to school for elementary education and English lit because
Oh,
originally I figured I figured if the music thing didn't really pan out, I wanted to pan out. I wanted to teach, and so I went ahead and got my degree in English, and had plans to go ahead and do grad school and move forward through academia. But I got sidetracked by just making records for, I don't know, 20 some odd years at this point.
yeah.
I'm still sidetracked.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you're still sidetracked. But English, that makes sense as a singer songwriter. I'm sure that helped quite a bit with your lyric writing and everything else.
I try to convince my dad that I do use my degree. It may not look like I do, but I, I do try to put it to use.
Sure, sure. Well, when did things start kind of moving for you? Like, were you in high school or in college? Like, as far as
Um,
music and you said you're making records and you're still in college and you're making records?
I took a break between sophomore and junior year of college, and I joined a band from Dallas called Funland, and we signed a record deal with Arista Records and kind of
Wow.
the post Nirvana, whirlwind of signings that went down. We were part of that way back in the day, and they essentially gave us $30,000 in a van and said go to it. And so we toured a ton around the U.S. and I kind of got my education on hardcore touring at age 20, 21, riding around in a van with my friends doing that. And it was a really valuable and informative and good experience to kind of to take part in something like that. And I'm glad I took the break between in college because I wasn't really decided yet. And I was getting to the point where I was going to start wasting money if I was
Mhm.
just hanging out taking classes. And so it was a good time to take a break. It gave me about 3.5 years of rock and roll education. I came back to Denton from Dallas and finished my degree, and then started a band called Centromatic.
Mm.
And that remained, to be from, I guess, goodness, 1996 to 2014. And so that's kind of how it all unfurled over the years.
Well, that's interesting. So with Funland, you just joined the band? Like, how? Tell me about the process of getting with Arista Records, or was that already a conversation prior to you joining the band?
It wasn't. We formed it. We formed. I should have been more specific about that. But we formed the band on Super Bowl Sunday of 1991, and we signed
You
with
guys
Arista.
watching the game or something, and that's how it kind of
I
formed?
think we had it on in the other room, but we were really just seeing if it all worked, and it was great from the start. My bandmates. I don't know. We all looked after each other, and it was a good experience. By that spring, we were playing um, really nice, like opening slots for good shows, which felt great because I had been playing in pretty rough and tumble kind of crummy clubs. And I remember at that point, it's like, man, if I could just have like a perfect monitor mix, I would be happy. And that was my goal, was just to have decent monitor mixes behind the drum set. And so finally, around spring of '91, summer of '91, we started doing a bunch of regional touring, and then that led to more national stuff later in '92, and that was when we signed with Arista. And we were with them for a few years. We did an EP with them with the intention to follow it up with an LP. We recorded half of that LP. It wasn't really to their liking, but it was to ours. We were super happy with it. So essentially, we just kind of agreed to disagree and went our own way. So the band took the buyout money, and we recorded the rest of the record and released it through a smaller label here in Texas. So that was kind of the Funland trek.
Wow. Well, that must have been exciting though to have, a record label interested and then signing a
Yeah.
deal and putting out an album. Was Arista the first label that approached you guys, or did you have like other people? Because I know in the 90s it was big for if a band was kind of starting to do something, that their major labels like wine and dine you and take you to different, like there's stories of like Green Day going to Disneyland just because they made like yeah, we want to go to Disneyland or
Yeah.
something like that. Did you have any of
Yeah.
those moments?
Those were the land of advances and honey, as I call it. And things were pretty gluttonous on a lot of levels, I think, for many parts of the industry. I wouldn't call it a signing frenzy or anything like that. I feel like there were one or two other labels that were interested, but oddly enough, for the giant label that it is, Arista was willing to give us something that wasn't. We weren't looking for like crazy money or anything. We
Mhm.
didn't want to be. I'm really having to throw myself back into the mindset almost 30 years ago, but I feel like our collective feelings were that we didn't want a massive advance, and we didn't want a lot of pressure thrown on us. We really wanted a van and some new gear and a little bit of money to live on, and
Mhm.
really just a tour. So we kept the deal pretty modest, especially for such a large label.
That was
Um,
probably a really smart move on your guys' end, to be honest,
well,
right?
it wound up being that way. We didn't really know where it would go at the time, but it wound up being a good thing because when we did part ways before the release of the full length record, it wasn't like there was just a heap of money or assets on the table. It was a real modest deal for Arista, so
Mhm.
I don't think anybody walked away with terribly scarred feelings.
Sure. Yeah, it wasn't like they gave you $100,000 and then they're like, "Okay, you owe us again."
No, it
You'll
wasn't
hear
anything.
those horror stories.
It actually worked out to where we wound up walking with money, which is almost unheard of. We did not owe
Yeah,
them; they owed us money, which we just used in our best interest with that record. So
that's brilliant. That's cool. So
we got
with fun,
lucky.
yeah, yeah, definitely. With Funland, you were the drummer. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Okay. And then when you started Centromatic, you were the singer frontman.
right.
Tell me about that transition.
Well, with Funland, I was messing around with guitar parts and melodies, and would even offer up. I'd offered up several songs to them over the years, but never did I take it so far as writing lyrics or insisting that our singer sing my lyrics, just for the fact that one, I thought he was a wonderful lyricist in the first place, and second, I didn't want to subject him to getting up there and singing my lyrics when he's perfectly capable, and I fully trusted him with lyrical content anyway. And so I would just sort of suggest a part and then kind of hand the guitar over and then go back behind the drum set to my space, and we would flesh out a song.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how things went through, especially the last few years of Funland. But then I finally got confident maybe in the spring of 95, summer of 95, and saw my first true song through lyrically, and verses, choruses, bridge, the whole thing. I completed a song, and it I was relieved that I actually completed the task, but also that just led to kind of a writing frenzy over the rest of 95 and into 96. And so with that, it became kind of a bedroom recording project. I didn't have a band or anything. I was recording on a 4-track in my little bedroom in Denton, Texas, and I just had these cassettes all over the place, man, and I needed something to label them with, so I would at least be able to identify that they were the songs that I'd been working on. And I had this old Italian accordion. The model name was Centromatic, and so I just put Centromatic and
Oh.
masking tape on all these cassettes, and that just stuck as the band name and the project name throughout that band's existence.
Yeah, I mean, that band was around 20 years or so.
Yeah, just a little bit under 18, I think. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, so playing the first show at Centromatic, how was that? I mean, instead of being behind the kit, now you're in front of a bunch of people. Was that your first experience, like
Um,
singing in front and playing guitar in front of people?
yeah, it was a total nightmare. It was terrifying. an old friend of mine who was the promoter at the club in Denton at the time, a place called the Argo, really great club. Um, he approached me and said, "Hey man, do you want to play a show in 3 weeks? 3 weeks from tonight. I think you're ready. You know, I know you got these songs. I've heard them." And we would hang around and pal around on the weekends and stuff. So I'd share the music with him. But he said, "Do you want to play a show?" And I said, "Absolutely not. No way." And he said, "Well, that's too bad because I already put posters up around town, and you're opening for Rubber Bullet and Quartet Out. I think
Wow.
I can't remember the bill, but he's like, I already put the posters up, so you got 3 weeks to really get it down."
Figure it out.
And, to which my response was, "Well, screw you." And so I went down there and took my little amp and my guitar, and I remember taking my glasses off for the show because I didn't want to see any detail in the room. I didn't want to see the whites of people's eyes, and powered through maybe 10 or 11 songs in 30 minutes, and that was it.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the way that I did shows for the first almost year of Centromatic, and then finally we became a band in early '97.
Wow. Was it just so the early so that first show, were you
Yeah,
it was just you by yourself up there?
solo electric. Yeah, just like
Wow.
loud electric distorted guitar, and I still do shows that way because it's kind of fun to revisit that aesthetic.
Mhm.
But that's the way that I did it because in my mind, I heard the full band in my head, so I just performed the songs as if the full band was on stage. It's just that they weren't. It was just me and an electric guitar.
Wow. And with the well, I did read on the first record that you put out was all you, right? You recorded all the parts,
That's
which
right.
probably
Yeah.
makes it pretty. I mean, if being a drummer, I'm sure like if you can lay that down and you know everything else, you could
Yeah.
it probably makes it a bit easier. Like I always
Yeah.
know that like finding a drummer is always like the nightmare. That's why I said you were
Here's
the pick of the litter when you're in high school.
Yeah, the way that record was recorded, I would typically just go in and track the drum part and then build the song around the drums. I played everything on it with the exception of cello and violin. Those are two things that I absolutely can't fake my way through.
Mhm.
But the rest of it, I felt at least competent enough to get the spirit and the energy across, just with the drums and the guitars and bass and backing vocals and all that stuff. So.
Mhm. And so, well, did you self-release that first record, or how'd that come out?
It was put out by a small label called Steve Records, a Dallas label, and it came out basically as an extension of the Funland contract.
Hmm.
That label put out the Funland full length, and then they had an option to pick up any or all of our solo records
Oh,
after
I remember
Funland
that
was done.
being a thing in the 90s as well.
Yeah, so they had an option to do it, and so they picked up the Centromatic record, which
Wow.
is
Okay.
interesting. There was a little bit of, we just had to sort some things out because typically they put out, just remembering them at the time, they put out pretty produced and pretty, uh, some refined records, and they got a really brash, like 23 song, very lo-fi, loud record from me. And there was a little bit of, are you sure this is the way, you really want to present things? And I just distinctly remember thinking, yeah, this is the right way for this record to exist and be recorded and everything. So they've very kindly acquiesced and put it out. So
Wow. And moving forward from there, was did you keep it similar to that with your recordings, or was it like you moved it to the big studios and kind of made more polished albums with Centromatic, or did you keep it pretty lo-fi when you're recording?
we still kept it pretty low-fi. It's just a matter that, Mark and Matt and Scott were in the picture shortly thereafter. And I they had already been friends for many years, and the trust levels were set in stone before the band even existed. Um, so it felt like a very natural carryover to start handing them songs and trusting them with. I mean, we didn't even have a proper rehearsal until after we had played 2 shows. So that was a
Wow.
matter of, man, I totally trust you guys. I
Oh
trust you
my.
guys in my life. Let's just like I'll show you the songs. I'm not playing complicated jazz. I know, 8 or 9 chords, and so I kind of showed them the concrete versions of the songs on an acoustic guitar and said, "All right, cool, load up all your stuff and we'll meet down at the Rock Club in an hour and I'll see you on stage." And that's how we did things for the first two Centromatic shows. And then we finally decided to have a practice. And then right after that, Scott joined the band. And so we became the four piece that existed for the duration from 97 to 14.
Wow. And when did you start seeing, like, were you guys, because you had experience touring and you probably knew people within the industry, were you able to tour pretty quickly after putting the record out, or and kind of forming your band, or how did you guys start getting momentum?
It took a little bit of time, honestly. I was still finishing up college and I really wanted to see that through, especially after taking pause a few years prior. I really just was dedicated to finishing what I started with that whole thing. Uh, and everybody else had other commitments for a little while. So I'm having to like throw myself back 20 plus years to get my timeline right. But throughout 97 and 90, I want to say fall of 98, we started finally reaching toward, greater lengths to get out and play. We wound up doing Chicago and St. Louis and CMJ over in New York City. And so we started finally putting some miles on a borrowed van. And then by the fall of 99, we went out and did a run with the Promise Ring and Burning Airlines,
Wow.
Jay Robbins band. And by that point, we were starting to get more serious about, just putting more miles in and really becoming a true band. But it did take a couple of years, I think, for everyone's lives to kind of align and to make that work. But during those years, we recorded a ton. In the
Mhm.
summer of 98, we recorded 3 records and essentially just stockpiled them.
Three
And
albums in 1 year?
we recorded 3 records in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Tell me what, that's crazy. So were
It
those
was,
songs that you already had, or you were just cranking them out?
I was writing a ton, and they had already had the demos and they kind of knew what they were coming into. But we rented a studio in Millstadt, Illinois, just a little ways across from St. Louis and south. We rented Jay Farrar from Sunvolt's studio for 6 weeks, and we rented an apartment in Belleville and basically just clocked in every single day and tracked music. And so we're lo-fi 4-track productions. And we wound up coming out of there with about 40, I want to say 40 songs. And so we kind of tailored 3 records out of that and slowly put those out throughout the course of 98 to 2000, I want to say.
Okay, I was gonna ask you, how did you roll out the release of those? I'm sure you didn't go like, here's 3 records, a record a month or something.
No, we didn't do that. We just we kind of tailor made them. We had kind of a more sort of produced rock record, and then we had a record that was very lo-fi and more almost kind of had a feeling of B-sides. And then we had an extremely mellow record that we wound up titling Navigational. And so we kind of put the puzzle pieces together democratically to find a way to release all that music over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. So
Okay.
we weren't, just because we weren't touring a lot didn't mean we weren't busy. We were just assembling, I guess, reasons to tour a little later down the line, which by 2000 or so, we really started trying to hit the road in a dedicated way.
Mhm. With the 3 records, like when you guys would play live shows, did you
hmm
have to save say you put the first record out, would you only play album or songs from that record and previous, or would you dive into some of the other songs that you had that you weren't planning to release until later down the line?
Oh man, any on the table pretty much. I don't want to lose you.
Oh, yeah.
Have you got me?
I've got you now. You froze a couple times,
Okay.
but it's the Zoom is catching up, so I'm hearing everything
Oh,
you're
okay. Got it.
saying.
I'm in here trying to move around to see if that does any better, but that may be a foolish move on my behalf.
Oh no, it looks good. Sounds good right now.
As far as that stuff went, there were no rules. Like if a unreleased song really took and we had a good time playing it, well then we played it. It didn't matter if it was released or not. And there
Okay.
were some songs that we wound up playing, years in advance of their release, and they became kind of set staples. So we just, it was really just a matter of what was fun and what we felt like we were embodying well as a band. It was all possible.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder if like were you getting any sort of like not really like I like if a fan walked up to you and said, "How come X song? When are you gonna put that out? Like you play it every time I see you. Like, is that ever
Yeah.
gonna come out on a record? Did you ever have those experiences?"
Oh yes, a lot. I mean, there were a couple songs, like, every show someone would come up and like, "Man, you guys play that song all the time. When is it coming out?" And it was not always easy to find those answers, because a lot of the time when we made records, it was more about the way the record fit together than the urgency of putting maybe with the crowd. Like we were just that felt good to our ears, and so um, sometimes that might mean postponing a song
Hmm.
down the line because these 13 songs feel just right together, and we'll find a place for that one later. And I still make records like that, but I think we were very dedicated to the sequence and kind of the journey or the ride that the record offered. We were
Hmm.
really fixated on that.
That's amazing. That's the first, but that's the first time I've ever heard that story of having that much music together and kind of saving it as you kind of go on. I mean, it's interesting now, kind of like not full circle, but like with the current state, that's kind of what artists have to do. Like a lot of
Yeah,
people had a record done in 2019 and then they're like putting it out now or at the end of last year because it was like, do I put this out because I can't tour it? Like, what do we do with
yeah.
it?
Had I known we were sitting in a pandemic 20 years, 20 years ago, I might have saved a few. But
Yeah, sure.
my pandemic foresight is really terrible.
That's a probably good thing. Well, okay. So, well, during the course of Centromatic, you also started South San Gabriel. Like,
That's right.
how were you juggling? I mean, look, you had multiple bands happening at the same time, right?
That's right. Yeah, and South San Gabriel involved some additional musicians as well, just to complicate things. But the way that band wound up kind of evolving was I always like to joke that we founded that band because of set list arguments, and with that I mean that certain nights, maybe a couple of us wanted to play a much more brash, loud rock set, and then a couple of us would want to do a much more ambient, laid back set.
Hmm.
And after some back and forth with that over the course of a few months, we just decided, you got this whole stable of we've got this stable of very mellow music, and we want to collaborate with other musicians. Why not just form a different band to accommodate that? And we'll let Centromatic remain to be the rock band with just the four of us.
Hmm.
um, because I think we knew from the beginning that Centromatic would be the four of us or it wouldn't be. We discovered pretty quickly that it just felt like no one was expendable. We were very true to ourselves. We looked after each other, and we discovered that our roles within the band were crucial enough to where it just wouldn't go on if someone had to go or wanted to go. And so we let Centromatic kind of be our, special, like, gate kept building over here it was just the four of us, but there'd be as many as, I don't know, 8 or 9 people on stage.
Wow.
Um, and it was way more open. The boundaries with South San Gabriel kind of were non-existent, whereas Centromatic, I think we were inherently protective of from the start. So we let South San Gabriel become that kind of band to accommodate the more, I don't know, kind of the more
Like
mellow and atmospheric side of us.
that's cool. That's a go. And then would you ever do a show where you'd play, both sets? Like, did South San Gabriel ever do the same bill as Centromatic?
Yeah, we did in 2008, and it almost like it almost killed us, man.
I was gonna say that must have been a handful.
We did. We got the bright idea. We released this record called Dual Hawks, and it was one side was South San Gabriel, and another LP was Centromatic, and so we decided we were already happy with that idea. I have zero regrets about that. But we did decide to take the Dual Hawks tour on the road, where South San Gabriel would play first, and then there would be a middle band or songwriter or something to break things up a little bit. And then Centromatic would come out and play the end of the night, play the last show. And that was super fun at the beginning, but over the course of like the entire United States, and then doing that through by the end of it, I mean, it was definitely a lot of huffing and puffing, and just some logistics to look after. We were certainly good and tired. I mean, in keeping it in perspective, we were lucky to get to do it. We weren't doing quarry work or anything like that, and I'm super thankful for that. But man, we were doing everything ourselves. We were driving ourselves, and doing our own merch, and no crew. I mean, we were it. So we just packed in the van, all six of us, and rode around the states and did it, and then went to Europe and did it.
Wow. You went to you did Europe and the States as both bands?
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I
Yeah.
mean, you've been in so many projects and you started so many bands. I mean, you have Molina and Johnson. Tell me about that project a little bit.
Oh goodness. Man, where to start? We met, I want to say we met I think in '01 or '02 at one of his shows in Denton. But our first real conversation took place, I want to say maybe '04 at the corner of 6th and Red River in Austin during South by. And we wound
Oh,
up
okay.
kind of tracing a lot of mutual friends inroads, and it turned out that they listened to our records a lot in their van, and we listened to their records a lot in our van, and there was an admiration, I think, that was already in place, to the point where, I don't know, felt it felt like I was. And so I want to say '07, I went to see him at the old Emos here in Austin in the front room, and I wound up
Mhm.
talking to Molina real late after the show, and everything's closing down, and we're kind of wrapping up, and I'm about to walk away, and he said, "Hey man, we should make a record together." And uh, you know, 9 times out of 10, when musicians say that, a lot of the time it just doesn't get done, and it's not because they don't want to do it, but it's just a matter of organizing schedules, and holding off the band for a little while you can go do a side project thing, and sometimes it gets complicated. But he gave me his info, and we emailed the next day, and or no, he emailed within 72 hours and said, "Hey, where do you want to do our record? Let's
Wow.
let's book time and make it happen." So I suggested the studio, and he said, "All right, let's make it." This was September of '07. He said, "Let's make it during the first full moon of 2008," which is
Interesting.
total Molino. I love it.
That's cool.
And I said, "Okay, well, here's the studio." He's living in London at the time. He's like, "Great, I got my plane ticket. I'm ready to go." And so that was it. I mean, we submitted our time, and in Argyle, Texas, which is just south of Denton, at a
Mhm.
studio called the Echo Lab, which my drummer from Centromatic, Matt, runs it. So we recorded it there, I think, and we workshopped and wrote on the premises, and tried to be the best, backing musicians we could be for one another.
Uh-huh. So was it
And
like a
so it came
split?
out.
It was like a split record where or would you guys collaborate together?
We would collaborate some together. We did go off every morning and kind of write on our own, and then come in and say, "All right, what do you got?" And show your cards, and we would just start in on something. And but there were a couple of things where it was like, you take a verse here, you write this verse, and I'll write that verse. Um, but given that time was so short, and that we didn't really have a whole lot of time we didn't have any time to get together before the record.
Mhm.
Uh, we it wasn't quite as collaborative as I would have hoped, but at the same time, I think it wound up being cohesive in a way where I think we were both in writing phases that meshed well together, and it made, to my ear, uh, a satisfying collection of songs. And like I say, we each backed each other on the songs, and we called in other musicians to help us out as well. Um, but really, we tried to be the best side people we could be for each other.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, I'm just looking at your discography. You've been in so many bands. Like, how do you, when you wrote a song for, how did you know which band the song should go for? You know what I mean? Like, oh, this sounds more like this, or this sounds more like a Centromatic song. Like, how were you kind of
Most of the
deciding which
time,
songs went where?
most of the time, and again, I'm throwing myself back into band life, and it's been a few years, but because everything's kind of solo right now, or duo kind of. It's a little more. It's not quite as crazy as it was 10 or 12 years ago, and that's all right. But back then, when I was writing, I'd say 94% of the time, I knew once I was done writing a song, I knew exactly where I wanted it to go. I
Mhm.
just had an inkling of what band I wanted it to go to. And if it was on the fence or if it was just hanging around, well, then I'd bring it into the guys and we'd talk about it.
Mhm.
I wasn't precious about that kind of thing. I wanted everybody to have their say. If I just was uncertain about it, I leaned on those guys, for filtering purposes so many times, and I trusted them to where a lot of the time, if a certain song was just hanging around on the fence, um, they were right about where to put it.
That's cool. That's great to have, peers and other people around you that you trust with that. Cause you'll hear, I mean, some songwriters are like, here's the song, play it kind of thing, or I'm the front man of the band and I'm the songwriter and you just play what I've decided on. Whereas, yeah, you had stuff and you kind of let other people kind of help steer the ship, so to speak.
Definitely, yeah, we lean on each other a lot for that. And I do think that inherently that's what kept the band. That's part of the energy for as long as we lasted. Is that
Mhm.
um, so, there was just no drama. There's no drama, man. And I know people want drama a lot of the time, but we just didn't really have it. And that's
That's
all
a good
right. There
thing.
was no
Yeah,
drama to.
that's a good
I'm sure
thing.
some people largely unmarketable because we just didn't have any drama.
They're like trying to force stuff. If you guys had a
Yeah.
little bit more drama in your band.
Records if you just drum up the drama a little bit, but we were incapable of doing that personality wise.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good thing. You ended up, so you hop back on the drums and start playing with Monsters of Folk, Connor
That's right.
Oberst. How did you meet them?
We had all met years before.
Okay.
I think I met Connor in 2001, and I met him, and I met Matt in '01 as well. We played a show together at the old Covered Wagon in San Francisco one night in the blustery December of 2001, and bought CDs and things. And then I had known Jim since maybe 2000 or 2001. I think I met all those guys in '01, and we would run across each other from time to time on the road, or South San Gabriel did a lot of touring with My Morning Jacket.
Oh,
I want
wow.
to say '03 through '05, on and off in Europe and in the States.
That's
And so
amazing.
there was a pretty tight knit uh, kinship amongst everybody, even, I don't know, even by the time that long before the band even existed, we just called on each other whenever we come to town and things like that, or go see each other.
Mhm.
And so Jim reached out, I want to say in the summer of '09, and we had just finished up recording a Woody Guthrie archives project called New Multitudes. And so we were kind of wrapping all that up, and he texted and he said, "Hey, would you be into doing some drumming and singing for Monsters of Folk this fall?" And I already had a few things like kind of on the calendar, but very fortunately, um, all the touring that we wound up doing that fall, and even the stuff that we did in 10, like it all just barely fit into the schedule to where we were able to make it work. And so that was that. We met in Portland and we rehearsed for 5 or 6 days and got the show together. I think it was 32 songs a night. I mean, it was a long night, and
Wow.
um, but no opener, and it wound up really. It was another case where I really think that everybody was just trying to be the best side person we could be for one another.
Mhm.
And so to get a glimpse into these friends that I had for a while already, to get a glimpse into their writing tendencies and their tour, their rehearsal preps and all that stuff was a real honor. It was really neat to see some of my favorite people from that part of their world as opposed from, out in the audience. I always argued that I had the best seat in the house.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool. And I was reading that I want to hear the story about Sheryl Crowe. So she was your babysitter? Like, how does this is like blows my mind.
Well, this goes back to the Kennett, Missouri days, but our families went to the same church, and her
Oh,
mother is the one that taught me piano for 5 years or so.
is that
Uh,
right?
yeah,
Wow.
that's right. Bernice taught me piano, and she was one of I think two or maybe three piano teachers in the town, and just given the fact that our families were friends, it was an automatic go-to that I would take lessons from her.
Mhm.
And so Sheryl comes from a super musical family. I mean, they're all amazing musicians, and so with the church connection and the piano connection, all that stuff, a lot of the time, her sister Karen was my main babysitter, but there would be times where Sheryl would fill in for Karen. But it's just this small town living, man. Everybody knew
Yeah.
everybody.
That's so cool. And was she, I mean, you said she comes from a musical family. Did you kind of get to
Mhm.
watch her career do its thing, or did you guys not really stay in touch as you
Well,
kind
she
of
sang
lived
in the church
apart?
choir. She sang up in the church choir up through college or so, and then, you know, um, in the years beyond that, she started playing and singing in bands on her own. I guess out of St. Louis, and then she went out to L.A. and became a backup singer for Michael Jackson, and
Mhm.
and that's when things really started to kind of take off for her. But um, no, it's not like we kept in touch through those years or anything like that. Our mothers kept in touch, and there would be times where she would come through Austin, and she would invite my mom to one of her shows. We'll play the Bridge School benefit, and Cheryl was on the bill, and our mothers put us back in touch with each other, so we reconnected there and had a super good time. But yeah, I had not seen her really since she had become famous before that, so it was a really fun sort of small thing. She stood in Neil Young's kitchen and proceeded to tell everybody how I used to act up in church, which was kind of funny.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Did she know that you were playing with Monsters of Folk at the time, or it was just like you kind of ran into each other and was like, "Whoa"? I mean, you knew she was on the bill because it went by her name, but
No, she knew because, like I say,
oh
our
yeah, your
moms,
mom's.
like, in total mom Cupid form, like, well, now here's just drop her a line, before you go out to Neil's for the dinner on Friday night before the bridge school thing happened. Back then, everybody out for supper, and so
Oh.
it's this long ride out to the ranch, and my wife and I got off the little shuttle bus, and Peggy Young's on the first. She's on the front steps, and she's like, "All right, now which one of y'all is Will?" And I was like, "I am." And she's like, "Well, Cheryl's by the bonfire. She's looking for you." So it was really, it was very funny, quite surreal in its way,
Yeah.
but also like it made me really excited and proud of Kennett, Missouri for a little while. It was kind of a neat reconnect.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's cool. She's out there telling stories about you.
It was fun.
I lived in San Francisco for about 5 years, and the Bridge School benefit was like one of my favorite things to go see. It was so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
It's
it's amazing.
unfortunate that it kind of ended prior to even COVID happening, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I got to see Guns N' Roses acoustic. Like, what?
Yeah.
It was so.
Yeah. It's
So
one of my
yeah.
favorite musical experiences I've ever participated in, and the kids are the stars of the show, and
Mhm.
it's an amazing grounding experience, and uh, I'll never forget it. Definitely won't
Yeah.
forget
Yeah, the one experience I had there, or the one I can remember, I went to about 3 of them when I was living there, and it was the Guns N' Roses one. So,
that. Yeah.
I think it was Foster the People or somebody played, and then Neil Young came out, and he brought the kids out, and he did this whole thing, and he's like, "All right, but before," he's like, "Guns N' Roses are coming up next, but before they come out, I have another friend I want to introduce you to," and everyone's like, "Boo!" He's screaming at him, and like it's Guns N' Roses fans in the front, like yelling,
Yeah.
and then Eddie Vedder comes out, and it's just like cheering. Like it was like full 180, like so quickly. It was so funny. And Vedder came out, played 2 or 3 songs, and then
Yeah.
it was so funny, and it was so rad.
It's a neat experience, and it just seems like, I don't know, you would figure a bill like that could be pretty hoity-toity or ego-filled, and you just like everybody leaves their egos at the door because the kids are the stars of the show, and
Mhm.
um, also to hear music in that kind of way, to hear these powerful rock bands scale it back and play acoustic is
Uh-huh.
also a really neat experience. Um, but yeah, it just seems like a largely egoless and very friendly, very communal, um, spiritual experience.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It was such an amazing thing to be a part of, and even going to like seeing Gary Clark Jr. as like the opener. Like that's how
Yeah,
big the Bills were at that time. I think I saw one year it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It was just
yeah,
like their reunion. It was just such a cool thing, and that's so cool that's where you kind of reconnected with Sheryl Crow. That's such a big
yep,
cool moment.
yeah.
Um but I want to get into you have a book coming out. Really want to talk to you about the book, but I'm so fascinated by your art, and I want to pull it back to when you said that growing up in the small town, it was you either get in trouble or you're in sports, or are you a baseball player? Like, how does the whole baseball connection come into the play?
It's definitely been a big part of my life since I was a kid. I mean, it was my favorite sport growing up, and the way the art kind of came to be was, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. I'd moved into a small apartment and had a bunch of scraps of MDF board and some acrylic paints, and the walls were kind of barren and the place was kind of depressing. And I figured, well, I'm just going to start making baseball tribute paintings to kind of fill the space on the walls. And um, and so I did a few of those, and then that led to a couple of friends requesting paintings, and then that led to an art show maybe a year or two after that. But really, it was just the reason I started making those paintings was just to pay respect to certain players that I appreciated, but also learn a little bit more about some of the lesser known and more strange and peculiar stories that have happened throughout the game's history.
Mhm.
And so, really, that's it. And it's still the main reason. I get commissions a lot these days, and with no touring, that's what I'm leaning on pretty much all the time these days. But whenever I get time away from commissions, I still make paintings just to try to learn something new about the game or a player that I've always been curious about.
Oh, that's interesting. So like you'll just pick a player and then that's because yeah, you write up a little thing about them on the side, which is
Yeah,
amazing. And just some of the players you choose are like, you're not going to the Mickey Mantle or
yeah.
Babe Ruth or the even like, Willie.
Unless they're requested commissions, like I say, if I'm just left to my own devices, I'll go to the stranger stories or maybe the lesser known players. But either way, the reason I wanted to do it at the beginning is because I had hoped that each painting would kind of teach me something new, and that's still the case. Even I'm almost 500 paintings in now, and
Wow.
I'm still learning cool stories and interesting facts about these individuals that have made up the game's history.
Yeah, and so people will request a player, and then
A lot of the
you'll
time, yeah. Yeah, most of the time these days, people will request certain players, and I enjoy it, but, I do get some repeats, and that's fine, but so long as I can do a different take on the repeat, and not just recreate the last one I made of, say, Hank Aaron or Babe Ruth or somebody like that, one of the
Mhm.
bigger players, then I'll do it, I'll take it on.
That's cool. What was like the most off the wall player somebody has asked for? Do you remember?
Oh, um, I've had a couple of requests for family members that played ball,
Oh,
which is kinda interesting. One of my favorite requests happened in 2012, I wanna say. A guy reached out to me. This guy's become my friend since, but he reached out via Undertow and said, "Hey, um, I wanna commission you to make a painting of my dad. He threw the first no-hitter in Swedish baseball history."
interesting.
And, to which my response was, "Bullshit. There's no Swedish history." But of course, then he followed it up with newspaper clippings and photographs, and I was astonished to find out that there is Swedish baseball history. And his dad did definitely throw the first no hitter in Swedish baseball history. So I took it on and made the painting. And a couple years later, I was touring through Iowa and wound up meeting him and his dad and hanging out. And so that was one of the cooler ones that I've gotten. Just every once in a while, I'll get an oddball one like, "Hey, my uncle played in California minor leagues back in the day, and I'd love to have a painting of him." And I don't know, sometimes I just get family requests, which is
I, l-
fun.
I was gonna say because my grandfather, my dad's dad played for the Indians in the '40s, and I would
Wow,
love to have
really
a
good then.
something like that. He was a third baseman, but I have all these clippings and stuff, but I can't find like a whole lot online about it because
Yeah,
you had like two offers, one from the Indians and one from the Pirates, and he played for the Pirates. And like my uncle has the jersey that he got, and it was
yeah,
back when like if you were a rookie, it didn't matter what number you were. It was kind of like they would just give you
yeah,
another guy's old jersey. So he had like somebody else. I forgot. He knew who my uncle would know exactly the player that
yeah,
jersey it was before my grandfather's. But yeah,
yeah.
I saw that. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And just now that you mentioned having other people like random, family members and stuff, it'd be awesome to have. We'll talk after this.
No, that's fine. My cousins commissioned me to paint my uncle, their father, last summer because he played in the Orioles system back in the '60s, and he was there with the Bluefield Orioles for a time when Cal Ripken Jr. was his bat boy.
Whoa.
Um, yeah, kind of crazy. So it was a little intimidating painting my uncle. It's intimidating painting anyone that's still living that can actually track me down and beat me up if they don't like the painting.
Sure.
Um, but even more intimidating painting my uncle, making sure I get, at least get it close.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of a cool one that I've done in the last few months.
I love the Nolan Ryan one because you capture his pitch, his wind up.
Yeah, you gotta get the kick, right? You gotta get the
Yeah.
leg.
Are you gonna do a Hideo Nomo one? Then you could get the real high
Oh,
kick up on there.
yeah.
And how do you come up with the script? If somebody were to ask you, did they kind of provide that for you?
N- some commissioners will provide me with a lot of information that they want involved, but most of the time, I'd say 80-85% of the time, they are of the sentiment like, just run with it, man. Do what you want, and I'll hopefully I'll like it. So there's a little intimidation in that, and that definitely creates a little anxiety. But at the same time, a lot of these players, there's so much history to go on, and there's so many interesting tidbits that I really have to whittle it down.
Mhm.
And space is, kind of at a premium for the text. But I'll find my information from different sources. I mean, I've got a stack of old baseball books on the art table or on the art bench and on the shelves in the studio, but also there's a bunch of stuff on Baseball Almanac and of course Wikipedia, and like you
Right.
can rifle through tons of stuff online and find a lot of material. But anyway, it just comes from various sources.
That's cool. That's really cool. And so let's talk about your book that's coming out. Have you always been like a writer? Like, tell me how this kind of concept started, or it's going to be your like
I
debut
wouldn't.
book, right?
That's right. Yeah, it comes out in March. I wouldn't. I don't know if it's fair to say I've always been a writer. I mean, I guess I've definitely written intermittently through my life, but I haven't. It's not the kind of thing that I've just been at the digging that ditch for years and years and years. But been doing it more in recent years. I will say that. And so, at any rate, the way that it came together was maybe 5 years ago. Goliad Media, which is my publisher out of Denton, Texas, approached me and they asked if I would assemble a book for their release, or for them to release, which was a little intimidating, but I appreciated the challenge of it, at least theoretically. And they were wide open about what it could be. They said, man, it can be memoirs, it can be tour stories, it could be fiction, it could be drawings and poetry, like whatever you want to put together, we're down for it. Which was also a little intimidating because there's just so much. I don't know, anything was possible.
Mm-hmm.
I almost wanted lines drawn in the sand for me to kind of work within. But so after a couple of false starts with some short stories and things like that, I finally got a short story to take hold about 2.5 years ago that felt satisfactory to me, and I felt confident enough to share it. And that wound up getting submitted and published in American Short Fiction, which was an honor. I did not submit it. A friend of mine submitted it without my knowing.
Oh wow.
Um, but that short story essentially became this novel. Like there was just a side to that short story and its characters. There was something about them that I just wanted to expand on them a little more. And frankly, I just wanted to hang out with them longer. So I committed to making that short story this book. So that's how it kind of came to be.
What's the plot of the book?
Oh my goodness, it's kind of a family story set in Southeast Missouri. So you've got a father that has an undiagnosed medical condition where he kind of has these outbursts and these fits in public places that are deeply uncomfortable for him and for everybody around him. And he and his uh, wife are separated and they have a teenage son, and they're kind of trying to work things out. I mean, they're working class people, and the story is pretty grim in places. It involves two very strong willed, beautiful sisters. The wife is one of the sisters, and it kind of centers. It's inspired by my homeland and a lot of the working class people that I knew or know there, and also inspired by the very strong women that I've been fortunate enough to have in my life all along. And so it's kind of about what might feel like rudderless individuals trying to figure their way, but in the end, in my estimation, and in my opinion, there's some hope involved too, because there's definitely a foundation of love between these people. They're just struggling.
I love that. And it comes out in March.
It comes out in March. That's right.
Wow. Very
Yeah.
are you how are you excited? Like what's the difference between putting a book out? Are you going to be able to do like a book tour, or how it, or is it just going to go out to the world and
I don't think we're doing any tours, right?
well, you know what I mean? Like essentially, hopefully if everything opens up, maybe you can get 30 people in
Yeah.
a library or something.
So I might. It's kind of all at the mercy of nature at this point. But if there's a way to tour late in the year, maybe I'll combine a solo like acoustic tour with and do some reading maybe interspersed. I really don't know. I'm not that far ahead right now. Right now, I feel really good just to have the dishes and the laundry done and have the kids like at their like where they need to be.
Sure.
But
I feel you on that. I got 2 kids. It's been a
yeah,
nightmare with this Zoom stuff.
yeah, I definitely have some Zoom things set up as far as talking with other writers, and I feel good about it. I'm proud that I saw it through. It
Mhm.
definitely recalibrated me in a lot of ways, because I've been used to making records for 30 years or so now, and making a record takes a certain amount of time, but writing a book takes a longer certain amount of time. And as my friend Willie Bloughton put it, it's like sometimes you just got to dig the ditch, man. You just have to see it through, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to be uh, pretty unglamorous at points, and there's going to be a lot of points where you want to quit, or you got to back up 10 steps after, taking this many forward, and you just have to commit to it. And so timeline wise, and just level of, or length of production wise, it definitely recalibrated me in a number of ways. But in that way, I think I learned from it, and I'm happy that I at least saw it through. um, so at any rate, I'm excited it's out in the world. I knew I wanted to write a book in my 20s at some point, but I just didn't know when in life I'd get around to it. So I'm glad I finally got to it.
That's exciting. So yeah, March it'll be out. I can't wait to read it. It sounds like a very
Awesome.
very interesting story, and I love the music you put out. So I can only imagine it's going to be an amazing book. So
Well, thank you. Thanks for even considering giving it some time. I really appreciate
oh,
that.
of course, and thank you, Will, for being here with me. I really appreciate your time. I have one more question for you. It's funny because you kind of just answered it prior to me asking it, but I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Oh my goodness.
You're kind of talking about it with the ditch. So I didn't.
I mean, it goes back to that. I mean, I think it's a matter of it's not always going to be uh, pleasant, and it's not always going to be easy, but sometimes you just have to see it through. And there are certain songs or certain short stories or certain paintings that are definitely you're gonna want to throw by the wayside, and maybe some of them should be, but I think I, most of the time, I think they're worth circling back to, because if you see them with fresh eyes, maybe on a different day, you might get a different dose of perspective of what that piece of art is capable of, and how it's capable of translating. And so, if anything, I would say really explore it before abandonment. Explore it and really give it its due time, because it showed up to you for a reason.